In the autumn of 1987, the Harper family moved into a weathered Victorian home in the outskirts of Eugene, Oregon. It was a quiet area with tall pine trees and narrow roads, the kind of town where everyone knew each other. Michael Harper, a widowed father, had recently relocated with his two daughters, Lily, age 15, and Sophie, age 10, hoping to change the scenery would help them heal after losing their mother to cancer. At first, the house seemed perfect. It was old but charming, with creaky floors, antique fixtures, and ivy crawling up the outer brick walls. But within a few weeks, small things began to feel off. It started with strange tapping sounds late at night, coming from inside the walls. The lights in the hallway would flicker without explanation, and the living room lamp turned on by itself twice while the family slept. A photo frame of their mother was found face down on the kitchen counter, even though no one had moved it. Michael dismissed it all. Old house, drafty pipes, electrical quirks, he'd say. But Lily wasn't so sure. One Friday night, while their dad was working late at the auto shop, Lily and Sophie decided to play with an old Ouija board they found boxed up in the attic. It was meant to be a joke. They sat on the floor of Lily's room, laughing nervously as they asked childish questions. Then the planchette moved. Once, twice. They froze. Sophie whispered, "You moved it." But Lily's hand was shaking. "No, I didn't." Before they could speak again, they heard it. 3 hard knocks inside the wall, just behind them. Not above, not outside, from within the wall. From that night on, things escalated. Silverware went missing from the kitchen. Sophie's dolls would appear sitting upright on the stairs, even though she never left them there. The TV turned on by itself at 3:12 a.m. 2 nights in a row, playing nothing but white noise. Michael began feeling watched and started keeping a bat beside his bed. But it still seemed like something they could ignore until what happened that Wednesday. Michael came home just after 6 p.m. The house was ice cold, even though the thermostat read 72. The windows were all shut. Static blared from every radio in the house. The basement light flickered, and when he called out, no one answered. He rushed upstairs, heart pounding. Lily's door was wide open. Sophie was sitting frozen on the bed, her eyes wide. She didn't speak, just pointed. At the end of the hallway stood a teenage boy, pale skin, a long blonde wig hanging crooked on his head. He was wearing an old white wedding dress, smudged with dirt. His face was streaked with red makeup, smeared across his cheeks like a clown. In his hand, a hatchet. Michael instinctively stepped in front of Sophie and yelled. The boy didn't flinch. He turned and bolted, not down the stairs, but into the linen closet. Michael chased him and opened the closet, only to find nothing but towels. The boy had vanished. Police were called. What they discovered still makes the hair on locals' neck stand. The boy was Jeremy Wells, 17 years old, a runaway who disappeared from a town 30 miles away months earlier. He had become obsessed with Lily after spotting her at a local grocery store. He had secretly broken into the Harper house while it was vacant and had been living inside the walls, undetected. He carved small tunnels through the crawl spaces and attic beams. He made peepholes behind vents, closets, and light fixtures, watching them, especially Lily, for weeks. Inside the walls, police found food wrappers, a sleeping bag, makeup kits, wigs, and even some of Lily's missing clothes. There was also a small notebook filled with disturbing drawings of the Harper family, of the house layout, and of a wedding with Lily. Jeremy was arrested, found curled up behind a false wall panel in the basement, silent and holding a hatchet. He was charged with breaking and entering, stalking, and intent to cause harm, but due to legal complications and his age, he was released on bail. Just 6 weeks later, Jeremy broke into another home just outside Bend, Oregon, and murdered a woman and her 2 children in their sleep. He was later convicted and sentenced to life without parole. The Harper family never returned to that house. It was sold the following year, but local realtors say the upstairs linen closet was permanently sealed shut, and some say, on cold nights, you can still hear tapping from inside the walls. In the fall of 2014, a group of college students rented a rundown house off campus near UNC Charlotte in North Carolina. It wasn't pretty, peeling paint, old plumbing, and constant flickering lights. But it was cheap, and for 10 broke students sharing a house, that was enough. Like most college homes, it had quirks. The heat barely worked. The basement light would flicker even when the switch was off. And at night, you could sometimes hear what sounded like shifting wood or faint footsteps, but no one paid attention. One of the roommates, Devin, began to notice things that didn't sit right. Cereal boxes seemed half-empty overnight. The fridge light was on when it should have been closed. And he'd walk into the kitchen in the morning and find cabinet doors wide open. At first, his friends brushed it off. "You were high," one joked. "Probably just forgot." But Devin wasn't convinced. There was one thing about the house that always creeped him out: the basement. There was a single steel door, bolted shut, labeled "Utility Do Not Open." Their landlord, Mr. Reed, said it was a sealed storage unit for old plumbing access. "No need to touch it," he'd insisted. Then, during a stormy night in November, a power surge knocked the lights out. Devin volunteered to go down to the breaker box, which was in the basement. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, flashlight flickering, he caught movement, a man stepping out from the shadows. Barefoot, calm, like he belonged there. Devin froze. Who are you?" The man smiled and said, "Name's Kyle." Then, without another word, he walked past him and up the stairs. Panicked, Devin ran after him and shouted for his roommates. But by the time they searched the house, Kyle was gone. That same night, they broke open the locked utility door with a crowbar. What they found behind it still gave them nightmares. The space was more than a closet. It was a hidden concrete room someone had converted into a living space. A stained mattress lay in the corner. There were stacks of ramen, a guitar, torn up books, and printed photos. Photos taken inside the house. Some of the roommates were in them. Unaware they'd been watched, Kyle had been living there. He'd gotten in months earlier. Turns out, he was a former tenant and still had a copy of the front door key. After moving out, he just never left. He slipped back in when the new students moved in and quietly lived in the basement, sneaking food, using the bathroom when no one was home, and staying absolutely silent otherwise. The police were called. Kyle didn't resist. He packed up a duffel bag, apologized, and left. No charges were filed. The cops said he hadn't technically broken in. He had a key, but the damage was done. The roommates started sleeping with their doors locked and knives beside their beds. A few dropped out of the lease early. The rest changed all the locks and installed security cameras. But the uneasiness never went away. A year later, another group of students moved into the same house. They'd heard rumors, of course, but laughed it off as exaggerated campus gossip. That didn't last long. Within weeks, they noticed food going missing, lights on in the middle of the night, and sound of someone walking upstairs while everyone was asleep. One night, Jordan, one of the new tenants, went down to investigate after hearing the sound of something fall in the basement. He opened the door and nearly vomited from the stench. What he found was worse than any of them imagined. Another man had moved in. This one was older, in his late 40s, dressed in layers of dirty clothing, holding a lantern and a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. His name was Harold, and he spoke softly, almost too softly. "I didn't mean to scare anyone," he said. "I'll leave if you want. Just needed a place." Once again, police were called. Harold explained he'd gotten the key from a man who used to live there, most likely Kyle, and thought the basement was abandoned. He had quietly lived in the dark for weeks, sleeping beneath the floorboards, listening to the students laugh, eat, talk, and live above him. There were no signs of violence. But that almost made it worse. Just the idea of someone being there, breathing quietly below them, listening every night, shattered the students' sense of safety. They moved out within 2 months. Later, they discovered there was a name for this phenomenon: frogging. When someone secretly lives in someone else's home without being detected. For them, it wasn't a term. It was real life. And it ruined the way they looked at safety, privacy, and especially basements. This story comes from a woman named Danielle, who used to live alone just outside Austin, Texas, in a quiet, wooded suburb called Pflugerville. Back in early 2015, she moved into a cozy one-bedroom home she'd rented after landing a full-time remote job as a UI designer. It was her first time living alone, and the house backed up to a small forest reserve, a selling point for Danielle, who loved privacy and nature. At first, everything felt peaceful. The home had charm. Hardwood floors, a little fireplace, and a wraparound porch. But in mid-March, things began to feel off. It started with small details. A spoon in the sink she didn't remember using. Her toothbrush damp in the evening, even though she hadn't brushed since morning. And once, her bathroom mirror had a small smudge, like someone had breathed on it. Danielle shrugged it off. Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I'm overthinking. Then came the sounds. Late at night, while watching Netflix in bed, she'd hear soft, rhythmic tapping in the walls, always after midnight. It wasn't random. It sounded intentional, like knuckles rapping against drywall. Danielle told herself it was probably animals or maybe shifting wood, but something about it felt too aware, like it waited for her to turn off the lights. One night, around 2 a.m., she heard a new sound, a light scraping noise on the air vent near her ceiling. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then silence. Danielle got up, pulled a chair over, and shined her phone light into the vent. Just metal and darkness. She told herself it was nothing, but 3 weeks later, she woke up to something she couldn't explain. Her back door was wide open. There was no sign of forced entry. No broken locks, no missing items. The porch light was still on, just the door, gently swinging in the early morning breeze. The police came. They inspected the house and told her the lock may have malfunctioned. It happens, the officer said, still shaken. Danielle replaced every lock in the house that day and even added a bolt on the inside. But that night, something changed. As she lay in bed trying to sleep, she heard it again, scraping, followed by something worse. Footsteps, not inside the room, not in the hallway, above her, in the crawl space between the ceiling and the roof. She held her breath, terrified. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and stopped just as she grabbed her phone. Danielle didn't sleep. At dawn, she pulled down the attic access panel in the hallway ceiling and climbed up with a flashlight. The attic was dusty and unkempt, filled with old insulation, broken boards, and spider webs. But in one far corner, she saw something that didn't belong. A plastic water bottle, an empty protein bar wrapper, and a rolled-up sleeping bag tucked into the shadows. She scrambled down, ran outside, and called the police. Again, this time, officers did a full sweep of the house. What they discovered still haunts Danielle. Behind the wall of her bedroom closet, hidden behind insulation and drywall, was a narrow vertical cavity, a space not even 2 feet wide. Inside, crouched in the dark, was a man. He was filthy, silent, and carried a small bag of belongings. He had entered the crawl space through a loose access panel behind the furnace in the laundry room and had built himself a kind of secret camp, complete with granola bars, a flashlight, and a stack of Danielle's mail. He cut a small peephole into the wall, covered by the air vent grill above her bed. He'd been watching her sleep every night. The man didn't fight. He didn't speak. He had no ID. Officers later confirmed he was a transient who had previously squatted in abandoned cabins around Texas. But what's worse, based on scuff marks and old food wrappers, the police believe he'd been living in a house before Danielle even moved in. Danielle moved out that same week. The landlord offered to patch the drywall and promised the place was totally safe, but no one stayed there again for long. According to neighbors, a young couple moved in later that summer, but left after just 3 weeks without giving a reason. As far as Danielle knows, the house remains vacant to this day. She still can't sleep without checking the attic, because the truth is, sometimes the scariest ghosts aren't the dead ones. They're the ones living just inches away, watching in the dark. In early 2009, in the small town of Elizabethtown, Kentucky, 76-year-old Walter Hammond, a retired postal clerk, was living alone while his wife recovered in a rehabilitation center after a fall. Walter was well-liked, quiet, polite, a man who stuck to his schedule like clockwork. His house was an aging two-story home built in the 1920s, with narrow hallways, creaky floorboards, and a tight attic crawl space no one had entered in years. But Walter wasn't really alone. Someone else had moved in and was living just above his ceiling. That man was Elias Marin, 59, a homeless drifter who had once been loosely acquainted with Walter through a church years ago. Desperate, sick, and looking for shelter, Elias had come to the house when he knew Walter would be out visiting his wife. Finding the back door unlocked, he let himself in, and when he discovered that the attic had a small, insulated nook barely large enough to crouch in, he made a decision that would haunt the entire town for years. Elias began living in the attic, slipping down only when Walter left, taking small amounts of food, water, and reading material. He was careful. He moved silently. The only clues were faint footsteps at night, a half-eaten banana, or newspaper pages missing. Walter chalked it all up to age and forgetfulness. But one Tuesday afternoon in March, Walter returned home 2 hours earlier than usual. He dropped his keys on the counter and heard movement above him. Cautiously, he climbed the stairs toward the attic hatch, calling out, "Hello?" As he reached for pull string, the hatch suddenly opened, and Elias lunged out. Startled, hungry, and cornered, Elias attacked with the first thing he could grab, an old fireplace poker from the attic storage. The beating was swift and brutal. Walter died in the hallway, just feet from his bedroom door. Elias panicked. He wiped what he could, locked the doors from the inside, and disappeared back into the attic. When police arrived hours later after Walter missed a daily call from his wife, they were baffled. No signs of forced entry, no stolen items, no footprints. The doors were locked, the windows shut tight. The press dubbed it the locked room murder. Locals whispered about ghosts. Some believed Walter had suffered a breakdown. The house was sealed for investigation, but no one thought to check the attic crawl space, assuming it was too small to fit a person. For 5 weeks, Elias continued to live in that attic. He only came down at night, eating scraps, drinking tap water, and pacing the upper floor in silence. He would crouch behind air vents, watching the police through grates, hiding just above their heads. Eventually, neighbors grew suspicious when lights flicked on at night, and shadows moved behind windows in a home that should have been vacant. Officers returned. This time they heard something, a faint scuffle above the ceiling. When they climbed into the attic, they were hit by a rank stench and found Elias curled into a dark corner, eyes wild, emaciated, and wearing the same clothes from the day of the murder. He confessed immediately. There was no resistance. Just a broken man who had been hiding in the walls of a dead man's house for over a month. He was sentenced to life without parole. The court ruled him mentally competent, but severely disturbed. The story shook Elizabethtown to its core. The house? It sat empty for years. No one wanted to live in a place where someone had watched from above, waited in the dark, listening, breathing, lurking inches away. And to this day, locals still refer to it as the Ceiling Man House. Some say if you stand in the hallway late at night, you'll still hear the creak of footsteps just above your head.